Alright, so in case you guys have been living under a rock for the past, 11 years or something, Avengers Endgame, what they are calling the end of Act 1 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, premieres the Friday of next week. I'm definitely going to go see it. I'm probably going to enjoy it. Say what you want about the Marvel movies. I think they're a really fun time. But because the movie is coming out next week, and because I really like putting out videos that are relevant to popular things, which are dropping around the same time as those videos, I thought it might be fun this week to go over a couple of theories that I have regarding not specifically Avengers Endgame, but the MCU as a whole going forward. I mean, I guess technically the first of the two theories that I'm going to go over today does specifically pertain to Endgame, unless Thanos lives through Endgame, I guess. But it still has far-reaching consequences for the MCU overall, so I'm still counting it. Anyway, if any of you know anything about the comic book version of Thanos, there's probably something you've noticed missing from his character's motivations in the MCU. And sure, the MCU versions of the characters do tend to be far more different from their comic book counterparts than some people realize. It is not impossible that that particular motivation was just completely removed from Thanos' entire character to simplify things, especially when the character that I am implying here may not ever actually come to factor into the MCU at all in the future, and just referencing them before they know whether or not they're going to be in the movie would be messy. And omitting this character from Thanos' motivation did allow them to give Thanos that environmentalist motivation, which definitely holds up to scrutiny if you think about it for more than 5 minutes. So I definitely see why it's not there. I understand. I get it. For those not in the know, what I'm referring to is the absence of the embodiment of death in the Marvel Universe, and Thanos' profound love at first sight style crush on this character being completely omitted from the Infinity War story. Granted, I don't know a ton about the comic book version of Thanos. That's something that one of my friends knows way more about than I do. But he has informed me that in the comics, Thanos wants to secure the Infinity Gauntlet and all of the Infinity Stones so that he can kill half of the universe in order to impress Death and make her fall for him as he has fallen for her. There's no environmentalist bent to it at all, which is a good thing because it probably would have been even more convoluted in the comics than it ended up being in the movies, honestly. Still, I do think it's possible that they could spin things so that Thanos' motivation does end up in a twisty way, lining up somewhat with his comic book motivations. And I do definitely think it was the intention early on for his motives to be the same from comic to movie. I base all of this on a single snippet of dialogue from one of the end credit scenes from the original Avengers movie. I'm gonna go ahead and play it for you here, even though I'll probably get demonetized for doing so. Whatever.
To challenge them is to court death.
Did you hear it? Thanos' minion specifically mentioned something about how challenging the Avengers is the same as courting death, and Thanos seemed thrilled by that idea. I think that this was meant to be an allusion to that Death character, that Thanos all this time had been seeking someone challenging enough that taking them on would mean courting death in a very literal sort of way. And it's possible that that's still what he's doing. It's possible that he has seen death before, maybe when his planet literally died, and that he has since been challenging more and more powerful people and or groups of people, taking more and more lives in the process of doing so, searching for someone, or again several someones, strong enough to finally kill him as a means of courting death. Every time he comes close to dying but doesn't, that's like the two of them barely not kissing or some other romantic tropey kind of thing. And when he does finally die in an impressive way, he hopes that that will impress her enough that they'll end up together in whatever constitutes the next life for a giant grimace monster guy. Maybe that's why the whole environmentalist thing doesn't really make sense, because he created that ideology specifically to rope in some percentage of his followers, created it as something for them to latch onto so that they would have a reason to follow him without protest, or some similar thing. Or if not that, then he invented it as some additional means of inspiring those who might be powerful enough to end him. Maybe he let it get out there in the universe that this Thanos guy is crazy and is trying to save everyone by killing half of everyone, so that when he showed up, people would know what he wanted. They would be spurred to action and therefore be that much more of a threat. It's convoluted, but I don't think it's any more convoluted than Thanos' character as it already exists in the MCU. It would make for an interesting twist if it is somehow confirmed in Endgame or a future film that this is the case, and it does bring everything back around to Thanos' comic book motives in an interesting and fresh way. Like, okay, stop typing out that comment. You know who you are. I will reiterate that I do understand that if that post-credit scene, if the dialogue in that post-credit scene was supposed to be an allusion to this death thing, it's more likely that its inclusion was just Marvel jumping the gun. That the death thing really isn't going to be part of movie Thanos motives at all. I just think it's possible, and it's interesting to talk and think about. More interestingly, though, and I think far more likely, is the second theory that I want to talk about a little bit today, and that's how mutants are going to be introduced into the MCU. We do know for a fact that since the Disney-Fox merger went through, and Disney took one more step towards ruling the planet, which is obviously their endgame, characters such as the Fantastic Four and, more importantly for the purposes of this theory, the X-Men are going to eventually make it into the MCU in some form. The Fantastic Four are one thing. They got their powers the same way I got my ability to duplicate myself. Exposure to cosmic rays, which I'm sure will be modernified into something more scientific when they finally do make it into the movies, but still, that's the kind of thing that can just happen to a person. Being a mutant isn't. Characters who are mutants were always mutants, even if their powers don't activate until later in life. Which is why bringing the X-Men into the MCU is an issue. Because up until now, we haven't seen any indication of mutants in this universe. And they can't just come out of nowhere. Like, this isn't even getting into the issue with including characters like Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, who in the comics are mutants, but giving them a different origin, a different reason for having powers. If mutants are introduced now, it just won't fit, unless they take a page out of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.'s book and treat the introduction of mutants into the MCU in a similar way to how Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. treated the introduction of Inhumans to their specific canon. In Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., there were people all over the Earth who had the potential to be Inhumans, and they just all kind of had it turned on at roughly the same time because of a global event. I don't know how true that is to the comic book Inhumans. I don't read the comic book Inhumans. I don't think anybody does, honestly. And obviously the specifics would have to be different, but there is a way to bring mutants into the MCU in the same way. Basically, at least. There is a theory going around about Avengers Endgame that all of the characters who were dusted in the snapping aren't really dead. That seemingly like Gamora, they're stuck in the Soul Stone, in some sort of alternate dimension which exists within its energy matrix or whatever. Like, that is supposedly where Thanos' consciousness ended up right after he did the snap in the end of Infinity War. That big orangey place where he talks to Kid Gamora. Supposedly he was really there, and so was Gamora. Incidentally, this is also how we think Gamora is going to get to come back to life, even though she wasn't dusted. That she'll reappear when everyone else does, because her soul was taken into the Soul Stone when she died as a sacrifice to obtain it. Now, keeping that in mind, let's look at how several other characters have obtained powers in the MCU. Most recently, at least in terms of which movies are most recent, Captain Marvel got her powers from exposure to energy from the Space Stone, i.e. the Tesseract, the blue cube, i.e. it was energy from an Infinity Stone which turned her powers on. Now, we don't know if the potential for those powers were already within her, but what if they were? The same goes for Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. What if they didn't get their powers from exposure to energy from the Mind Stone, but in fact their powers, their potential powers that already existed there, were turned on by that energy, by the experimentation done on them using that energy? I'm sure a lot of you guys can see where I'm going with this. What I'm proposing is that there are plenty of people already alive on Earth in the MCU who have the Mutant X gene, it's just not active yet. And that characters like Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch had their Mutant X gene turned on by exposure to energy from an Infinity Stone, and it seems like it can be any Infinity Stone that does the job. The population of mutants in Marvel Comics is something like 0.5% of the population. So dusting half the population and sticking them in the Soul Stone would definitely account for that percentage at the very least. What if the people trapped in the Soul Stone by the Snap who have the Mutant X gene have the gene activated by exposure to energy from the Soul Stone? Put simply, what if it is the Snap which creates mutants, which adds mutants to the MCU's continuity? Again, this is consistent with how we have seen several different characters get powers out of nowhere in this universe. And it doesn't even necessarily preclude a much smaller number of older mutants already existing in hiding. That would be your Magnetos and your Charles Xaviers and your Wolverines. With so few of them, they were able to remain in hiding without other mutants to recruit to their various causes. They didn't even have armies to fight each other with yet. But as new mutants start to appear, Magneto and Xavier specifically will start showing up and scooping them up in order to teach them and or turn them into child soldiers or whatever. We even have time for at least some of them to have their various tragic backstories that the X-Men writers seem to like so much, because we know that we're not getting X-Men in the MCU for at least the next 5 or so years. Unless the MCU writers are going to retroactively try to convince us that mutants have always been a thing and no one noticed them before, I really don't see any other way of them going about this whole X-Men mutant reveal aside from having some global event trigger it. And I mean, yeah, the Snap was a universal event, but the globe is still included within that. So here we have a global event hand-delivered to the MCU writers by the story that they've been weaving over all of these years. I would even go so far as to say that it doesn't make sense for them not to try to tie the emergence of mutants into the Snap in some way. It would feel more convoluted for them to try to come up with a different global event to explain it. But that's really it. That's all I wanted to go over with you guys this week. Obviously, one of these theories is sillier than the other one, the first one, but I do think that they're both at least fun to think about. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if it turned out that somebody already came up with the second one. It just seems so obvious to me. So please let me know if you know of someone else who's talked about this theory. I'd like to link to them in some way so that you guys can see the better version of this. All that said though, guys, as per usual, I'd like to know, what do you think of any of the ideas that I talked about in this video? Have I managed to uncover latent stories buried deep within the MCU, or does this video leave you wishing that you could just snap your fingers and make it go away? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over my Discord, link in the description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.